All right, in the next few lessons, I'm going to cover what I'm actually currently working on in my practice time. So I just got back from 3 months of touring and didn't really get a chance to do any practice on the road. And I got back and decided I would dive into a drum book. So I picked David Garibaldi's Future Sounds and opened it on page 1, and it had this thing about playing a paradiddle between the hi-hat and the snare and making the sounds even. And I worked through a couple of things and just realized I really need to work on this stuff. So I want to talk a little bit about time and basically what to practice. You know, you hear about people doing 8 hours a day of practice and you think, how the hell do you fill 8 hours with stuff? Well, yesterday I spent an hour and a half playing essentially one thing, which is what I'm going to show you today. And the idea is that you basically you can read a book that tells you how to fry an egg or bake a cake or whatever, and you can read it again and again and again. You can read all the little hints and tricks and things that you might need to be aware of in order to get it right. But the first time you go and do it, it's probably going to end up a mess. I fried an egg yesterday. Can't believe it's probably about the 4th egg I've ever fried in my life. And there were so many things that, like, oh, the bacon's in the way, and how do I get the oil on the top, and and it turned out, tasted all right, but it turned out pretty messy. And the only way to get better is to do it and do it again and do it again. And every time you do it, you find new questions that need answering. And you can then go away and think about those questions and find solutions to them. But basically, when it comes to drumming, it's kind of similar. But even if I tell you exactly how to play the bass drum or play the snare drum or how to kind of improve your time, the only way for you to get better, and for me to get better, is to actually do it. So I have this principle of reducing things to the simplest thing that you find difficult. So don't take, I got David Garibaldi's book, which has got lots of really complicated grooves in it, and I'm working on the most basic thing. So I kind of have ditched the book and I've just come back to this, and then I'll go back into it when I've got this nailed. My biggest issues are bass drum placement and playing the bass drum throwing off the balance of the kit. Bass drum consistency with doubles, so when you have 2 notes in a row, having them be equally important rather than the second one being more important and the timing get thrown off. The consistency of the dynamics and the timing between 2 hands when you're playing, for example, between the hi-hat and the snare drum. And then just feeling comfortable and confident in the groove. So that's a lot of things, but we're going to work on all of those in this. I read a book, I wrote a blog actually on part of this book. It's called Zen Golf. I don't play golf, but it has some very good life lessons in there and lessons for just improving at whatever it is that you do. And there was a chapter about having kind of unvirtuous thoughts or something, and the pupil went to the Zen master and said, I'm having these thoughts, how do I stop having them? Now, you have thoughts in your head. Where do they come from? Who knows where these thoughts come from? How do you change the thoughts that you have? Because you're not intending to have them, they're just cropping up. And so the Zen master said, get a pile of pebbles and get 2 buckets, and every time you have a virtuous thought, put a pebble in the bucket labeled virtuous. And every time you have a non-virtuous thought, put a pebble in the bucket labeled non-virtuous. And the pupil sat there for a few hours, and every time a non-virtuous thought came into his head, a pebble went in that bucket. And by the end of when he'd run out of pebbles, he looked and there were a lot of pebbles in this bucket and not so many in this bucket. And all he did was repeat that exercise on a daily basis, sit there and see which thoughts he had. And basically it's making him aware of his thoughts and kind of training him, because he knows that he wants to have more of these thoughts and fewer of these thoughts. He's just aware of the balance, and eventually he would sit there and all the pebbles would go in this bucket. So we're going to apply that approach to improving groove and timing things at the drum. So what you're going to do is play through these exercises, and when I give you an exercise and I demonstrate it, and it takes me 30 seconds to demonstrate it, that exercise is something that you might sit and do for an hour, like for a long time. And the idea is, while you're playing it, your mind can wander to different things. You can think about your hand technique. I was playing it and my right wrist started to hurt a little bit, so I started playing around with just slightly different ways of holding my arm and holding the stick. And then I might find that I was my back was uncomfortable, so I would start thinking about my posture and tweak things like that. So an hour gives you a long time to discover things that you wouldn't find if you just did something for 20 seconds. And you're basically going to smooth out the pebble. It's almost like a pebble being smoothed in a river. You know, it gets rolled around and the different rough edges get smoothed off it. And this is like you've got this groove and it's rolling around and you're smoothing off the edges until it really feels good and it's in your bones. You can just sit down and play this groove and it's going to knock people out. And the pebble analogy is just you're sitting there, and if you notice a bass drum is late or early, it doesn't matter. You just mentally go, okay, that was late, that was early, and you don't criticize yourself for it. And when you have a good one, you just go, that felt good. And you will know, you'll start to become aware of what feels good and what feels bad. And you might change some things technically while you're playing, but the idea is to just do it again and again and again. And by the end of an hour, or half an hour, or the third session of 20 minutes, you'll just find that you're playing better. This way you can see how you could easily pass 8 hours, because an 8-hour practice session could consist of working on 2 grooves at 4 different tempos each. Excuse me. I can't sit still for 8 hours. So doing an hour and a half is good for me. But the idea is you don't have to play really complicated things. And if you sit down and you can really nail this stuff, then forget it. Go and check out some other lessons and things and work on those. But for me, I sat down and I didn't play this nearly as well as I thought I ought to be able to. So record yourself having a go, and then try the things in the lesson and record yourself again later on and see if you're getting better. So with that introduction out the way, let's get on to the actual topic, which is going to be playing a paradiddle-based groove, and we want to be able to play anything we want with the bass drum and have this whole thing feel really good. So another thing I've picked up over the last few weeks is that it's more fun to play to a sequence than it is to a click. So I have a bass line that I've programmed in here, a bass line idea that I stole off an early Dave Weckl video. I programmed it into GarageBand. I'm going to include that file along with instructions on how to get it into your iPad or iPhone. You would need a Mac, I think, in order to do it. But I will also include an MP3 of this at maybe 2 different tempos that last for a few minutes. I'll either find a way and instructions so that you can loop it indefinitely, or I'll include long files. And I just find that sitting and playing to this feels better than just playing to a click. So this is the groove. So it's quantized. 1 Iana, 2 Iana, 3 Iana, 4 Iana, 1 Iana, 2 Iana, 3 Iana, 4 Iana. So the bass line accentuates different parts of those 16th notes, and it makes it interesting. So this is what we're going to be playing to. So exercise 1 is to play paradiddles on the snare drum, accenting the quarter note pulse. And you want this to sound as even as possible. So I'm going to give it a go. So that might be an exercise that you play for 20 minutes or half an hour, and that's really working on your paradiddles, on your hand technique, on preparations for strokes, so you can think about all that stuff we've covered in different lessons and just see how accurately you can play along with this sequence. And when that feels comfortable, then you're going to move it onto the hi-hat and do the same thing. On the hi-hat, it's a lot easier, I think, to identify how even it is. So this is what it sounds like on the hi-hat. So you'll notice I sped up a little bit in places, and you know, it takes a while, but you want to get this to the stage where it just feels comfortable. It comes out of you in a very comfortable way. So we know what this is a paradiddle, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. I'm now going to move the left hand to the snare drum, and you'll have now a backbeat on the 2 and 4. And what I find when I do this is suddenly I'm hearing the paradiddle, and I'm not hearing the constant stream of da 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 da, because the sound source is divided up. So in my head, I want to again kind of superimpose da 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 da, and hear that as an even stream of 16th notes. So here we're looking for 2 different velocity levels, basically an accent on the hi-hat, and then the quiet notes are an inch or so off the hi-hat, and same with the snare drum. And I just want those 2 levels, okay? So let me give you an example. I'll start on this hi-hat, and then I'll go to splitting it between them. Now, keep in mind, I've done this for like over 2 hours in the last few days, and I'm still, you know, a little bit shaky with it. And when I started, I was terrible, which is crazy, you know, because it seems like such a simple thing, but really what we're trying to do is eliminate unnecessary tension, internal and external tension. That's a kind of ground rule I have about things, is that when you start off doing something, you kind of overcompensate, and you move too much, you're too tense, you think your brain's all kind of, you know, mashed up with extra things you're thinking about. So what we're trying to do is shave away all of the unnecessary stuff until you're left with the essence of going, and it feels comfortable, and you can feel the smooth flow of those notes. So like I say, seems easy, but to really nail this, it's not easy at all. And you might apply some of the things we talked about in previous lessons, like you might sing taka tiki taka tiki taka tiki taka tiki taka, and try accenting different parts of that pattern, or try accenting some universal rhythms over the top. Taka tiki taka tiki taka tiki taka tiki 1 and atu and 3 and 4 and, or whatever it is you want. And but basically, just sit there and play this for a long time until it feels really comfortable. So the next step is to add the bass drum. And again, you would just work through the permutations of the bass drum. So you got the 4 notes, you're going to put it on the 1, and then on the E, and then on the and then on the A, and then on the 1 E, E and work through them all. Again, I'll link in this video to the page of permutations so you can see them written out. Now, the way I would approach this in the past would be, I'd see it in a book and I'd go, okay, paradiddle there, bass drum on the 1, and I'd go for about a minute at that, you know, and then I'd go, okay, I've got that, and then I'd move on to the next one. And yet when I did this the other day, it was still really messy. My bass drum control was really messy. So this is where, you know, I'll take playing on the E and I'll do it for an hour. Now there's another thing I want to talk about here, which is cyclic and segmented motions, and I may do a separate video on this, but the idea is, if you're doing this, that's a cyclic motion, because once it's going, it's like swinging a lasso around your head. Once it's going, the motion is continuous, and you just adjust the timing of this thing. So if it doesn't quite line up with the click, you speed it up a little bit or you slow it down a little bit. Segmented motions are ones that have breaks in the middle. So a segmented motion would be this. So you've got the motion, and then you've got a pause. And a segmented motion is much more complex, because you have to figure out what you're going to do in the pause and where you're going to prepare for the next motion and all those kind of things. So when I'm practicing permutations on the bass drum, I like to use segmented motions. Instead of playing do, 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 and play it on every quarter note, that's kind of a cyclic motion. You get into too much of a repetitive pattern, and it's easier to line that up. What I like to do is spread it out by at least 2 quarter notes. So dunk, 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 that would do 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. So you're playing it on the 1 and the 3. So when we play the E, it will be on the E of 1 and then the E of 3. So let me demonstrate with using the E on the bass drum and see how well I can do this. So let's get the sequence going. Okay, so there I actually only played once per bar, and that felt like a good way to do it. So you might play on the 1 like that. Did I say I'd demonstrate on the E? I don't know. So anyway, you play once per bar, and then if I'm going to do the E, I'll do that once per bar. So let me demonstrate the E. So this is going to be 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. I start on the hi-hat, so you can hear if this is being consistent. The hands are consistent with the bass drum in there, and then I move it onto the snare. Okay, so like I say, I've practiced it for a long time and I'm still not very good at it. There were just mainly flams there. Pebbles were mainly going in this bucket. And when you really nail it, when the bass drum really comes down with that left-hand note and they're just perfectly together, it feels good. You're like, oh, that was a good one. And I can't say what made it work and what made it not work, but the more you do it, basically your brain just kind of figures it out and it starts to get better, but only if you're paying attention. Only if you're kind of going, yep, good, bad, good, bad. If you're doing it and watching TV, you won't know whether it was good or bad, and therefore your brain won't be able to figure out, you know, what to do more of and what to do less of. So one nice thing about doing it every bar is I get right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, and it's coming with the left hand on the E, 1 E, okay? And I get a left hand with the bass drum, 1 E and a 2 E and a, and then I get a left hand on its own, 3 E and a 4 E and a, so I can check I'm positioning that on its own, okay, and how that feels when there's no bass drum with it. So one note per bar, essentially, on the 1, on the E, on the and then the A, and then you probably want to do the 2 E and A. Now, you get through a certain number of these, and then the other ones will start to just feel better. Your bass drum will basically learn how to be accurately where you want it to be. At least I hope so. If not, we got to work on all these individually, but that's fine. You can sit there, you can know you've had a good practice session if you get better at doing this and get more accurate. So that's the single bass drum hits, and then we're going to have 2 bass drum hits in a row. So 1E, for example. So let me give you an example of that. Now the things to watch out for here are, you don't want to accent, you don't want to accent with the feet. We're still trying to go quiet, we're still trying to go no matter what the foot's doing. So the hands are doing their own thing, should be unaffected by whatever the foot's doing. What I'm thinking about with these are the things that I find most difficult. I tend to play 2 notes on the bass drum as a kind of single thing, and usually one of the notes isn't very accurate or the right volume. And so with this, I'm really trying to have it be bam, bam, like 2 separate intended notes at this tempo at least. So it's the equivalent of having wrist strokes, bum, bum, instead of a kind of finger wrist thing. The other thing I'm trying not to do is bring my heel up too high, because I have a tendency to go, oh, I'm going to play a double, and that comes up here, and then I don't really play a good note. So I'm trying to keep my heel lower and have the beater come back and play really more ankle strokes. And I'm trying not to slide in like this. So there's all these things going on. So you could sit here and practice this for an hour, and as well as trying to make the hands all even, you're thinking about the bass drum technique and trying different things, and again, making mental notes with the pedals of which things feel better and which things feel worse. And then the other thing I'll do, which you'll have seen in other videos, is to just play the 1 for a while, just play the E for a while, and then switch between them. So I get to really appreciate what that double is, what the E part of that double is, what the 1 part of that double is, and then I can kind of have more fine-grained control over the elements of it rather than thinking of it as just a double. It all sounds kind of weird if you haven't experimented with this, but you'll kind of know what I mean, I think, when you get into it. So then you play the doubles in all the different places, and all different combinations of bass drum things. You're just basically always looking for one that's tricky, and then you spend a while working on that. And while you're working on it, you're thinking about, you know, you're playing it, and your brain gets to go, okay, how do my hands feel? So close your eyes, how do my hands feel while I'm playing this? Is there any pain anywhere? How's my balance, you know? The things I think about are, you don't want to be like this. Your head's the heaviest part of your body. Maybe. It's heavy anyway, and it's balancing on your neck. So if you're doing that, there's muscles required to kind of stop it falling on the floor. If you're doing that, which I used to do because I saw a video with Vinny Colaiuta playing like this, and I thought, I came up with the reason for it. I thought your head's heavy thing, so if you do that, then it helps your balance be that way, and that must be a good thing because Vinny's doing it. Not good. Your neck wants to be nice and straight, essentially. Think of a line coming out of the top, the crown of your head, like you're a puppet on a string, and that's pulling you up. And if you always think about that, you know, so you're sitting like this and this string pulls you up, you know, you don't have muscles that can push your bones further apart. All you can do is align your spine with gravity so that you're not fighting against gravity. So whenever you're slouching, think about pulling yourself up from there. And watch this bend in the back of your neck. Don't be doing this or that. Playing, what I find is if you're playing and you're working on hand technique, you'll be doing this to look at your hands, and that's bad for your thing. So you kind of like glance down every now and again, but it's better if you can set up a mirror or a camera with a TV. And also if you're playing cross stick, you know, I'll do this when I'm playing cross stick sometimes, and that's like all this bendy back and heavy stuff. So just sit back and, you know, think about that. That's basically all I want to cover in this lesson, because that is a lot of material. The main takeaway point is that you take something simple and play it for a long time, and in playing it for that long time, the first 5 minutes you will wonder what the point is. You'll think, I'm not getting any better at this. This feels kind of difficult or easy depending on where your brain's at. After 10 minutes, you might notice one thing. You might notice that sometimes your bass drum's a little bit late or early, or when you put the bass drum in on the E, that the paradiddle with the hand speeds up a bit and you lose the click. After 20 minutes, you might feel like you're getting worse for a while, but eventually things will start to settle into place, and the whole thing will smooth out. And at the end of it, I did it for an hour yesterday, and I was a little bit better. Still not great at it when I'm demoing today, but that's kind of the point. When you see a Dave Werkle video and he nails everything, he only nails it because he spent a long time doing this kind of stuff, but he just doesn't show you that. You see the end result. So just have a go. This might be something that in a week I'm like, oh, I can't be doing that for an hour every day. Just fine, but if I've done one practice session where I've worked on one groove for an hour, I've got benefit from that, and you will too. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.